thank you so much for making it here. I think this was towards the faggish end of COP. It feels weird saying that on day 2 of week 2, but I think this is how it feels like in a way. Everybody seems to be leaving tonight or by tomorrow. So thank you for the rest of you who have braved it out and are here to listen to this. I think we have a very power-packed panel, even if I say so myself, because I think it's we need some perspectives on what governments can and should be doing about Article 6. We also want to be in a position to set expectations right in terms of what Article 6 can bring to countries. I think while the euphoria is great, there is still a lot of work to be done on the demand side of these units. There's not going to be a ready market for it just because we have the supply. So it's always a two-way street, right? So a lot of the things that we're going to talk about are about making Article 6 happen for host countries and what would it take for host countries. There's a little bit of, I wouldn't say lack of understanding, but I think there's a bit of gap to be fulfilled there in terms of what we need to know. And also, how can standards work with governments towards helping them issue those credits and also understand the strategy basis which those issues of the credits are being made. And number 3 is for host countries not to flounder too much on technicalities of issuance register systems and at the cost of time of issuing these credits. And when you say we call it a policy paralysis that exists in the world today because we don't know enough, we don't do anything. And I think we need to really move the needle on action and action quickly. Because still we have the supply, there's no way to really suss out the demand side, and that's where a lot of these discussions today would be managed. We'll obviously, all of the moderators will go through a few questions and we will always want your participation in it. I know it's close to lunchtime, but I did not expect that many people. So thank you so much for coming by. But here I would want to start, of course, my good friend Hari here from World Bank to actually tell us a little bit about the context setting of this in terms of government action and the work that specifically World Bank has been doing with a lot of governments. This is important because we as a project developer always piggyback on other policy think tanks, makers, policy movers to give us that access to be able to then create the supply line. So Hari, over to you. You have a few minutes for a presentation. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Sandeep. Good morning, colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here and set the context. Actually, I'm sure, as Sandeep mentioned, it's a power-packed panel. and you will get to hear directly from countries, not just standards. This whole policy frameworks at the country level is becoming so complex nowadays. Like, if you are developing any carbon market project and looking for some kind of a decision making or some approval or authorization from the countries, you often hear two things. Either countries saying that, no, yeah, rules are not yet finalized, so we wanted to wait to understand better. Two, we are in the process of developing some kind of a policy framework. So until we finalize this one, so we will not know what on any of the projects that you're working. That actually, of course, is creating a lot of problems for the private sector in many of the countries. Of course, we have seen some development, some movement in terms of some countries already issuing some kind of a approvals and authorizations, but they all happened actually because of these different drivers. So why actually, of course, this carbon markets framework is needed? I mean, I'm sure we all know. I don't need to explain this one, but I think for us, I think it has a huge benefits actually for the country. I mean, it facilitates international cooperation so that because country puts forward what the country's approach is, how countries thinking about identifying the projects, who is responsible for what, how much time it takes, and then what are the eligible projects that we already identified, and etc. So that actually I think hopefully facilitates more cooperation between parties and etc. And then the most important part is transparency and accountability. Okay? So that's very critical. So because by laying out actually the whole things as part of the policy frameworks, government is also saying that we are taking the ownership. We are actually accountable for certain things that thing. Mr. Sandeep mentioned, of course, like it's policy paralysis, but it's not because countries don't know, but I think it's because they have a different understanding of different things. So that's basically also causing a lot of problems in terms of like why not much action is happening. And then, of course, standardize the global framework while recognizing that, of course, every country's context is different, priorities are different, and how they wanted to approach these things. Because so far, the experience is that, I mean, you hear the countries calling it strategies, policy, framework, policy, regulation, guidance. You have so many terminologies that's countries having, but the ultimate objective is like for them to give full picture on like how country wants to approach or how country wants to support the development of the capital markets. And then finally, of course, which is what is the critical of the private sector point of view, so it brings actually it builds the investor confidence, and then so that hopefully it will lead to more investments. So this is, of course, a rough, very quick assessment of some of the countries that actually we analyzed to look into how actually countries are approaching on different aspects. I mean, as you can rightly see, not every country is looking into the things at the same way. I mean, again, depending on how countries see where the potential exists and then how they need to look into, and then what are the minimum elements that they need to include as part of their be it a policy or a regulation or guidelines actually that they would say. I mean, this one, I think it's interesting one. Yesterday, Japan released this Article 6 implementation status report. I mean, you can see that. I mean, one side, it's encouraging actually to see that there are out of the 90 countries there, looked into 69 have either put in something actually to authorize or working towards actually establishing such kind of a thing. But the second one is, of course, is not very encouraging, right? But out of 90, there's only 9 actually, they have full, authorization and tracking arrangements that are in place. There's a lot needs to happen, and then whether we all aims to basically, push countries to have a very comprehensive policy framework before actually they start engaging in the capital market. I think that's a question basically that we all need to ask ourselves, is it the right approach for us to push? Or countries can start actually on some minimum things that, for example, the project eligibility and then what's the clarity and the authorization. But of course, one could ask actually, if they just want to say that, I authorize this particular project, but without having any legal backup. So then whether that provides the sufficient confidence to the market. I mean, all the issues related to what country decides to pull out this authorization at a later stage, etc. So, but I think so those are some of the choices that countries needs to make. I'm sure we'll hear directly from Coach Yuar and then Cambodia, how they are approaching some of these things. So this is one thing, of course, the World Bank actually now doing is how do we actually at least normally governments often rely on the international organizations or the service providers basically to guide them, to develop this kind of policy framework. And we all go differently, and then we all at once countries on different things, and so that often confuses. So can we actually jointly come up with a uniform approach that we all talk the same language and then reach the country? So with so far, of course, 6 partner organizations part of the 10 plus UNFCCC. So this is the decision framework where we identified some strategic questions that countries needs to ask themselves. And then, of course, we will now develop this into a full-fledged guidance documents in the next couple of months. So that will be, of course, made available so that all the partners that are into the capacity building now use this as a basis basically to talk to the countries and fully recognizing that not every country is at the same page. Because some countries have a huge experience in the Kyoto markets, and so they don't need to start from this. So how do you actually help those countries depending on where they are? Is what actually the objective of this thing. So this is again looking into all the policy frameworks. This is how actually the country's framework actually consists of different things. Again, it's we are coming up actually, again, how actually countries needs to develop these policy frameworks. What are the minimum things that they should have, and then all of the organizations that I mentioned actually are working on some of these things. UNFCCC is helping, and then of course standards also trying to help, and then of course organizations like GGGI, World Bank, everybody is in this space So can we actually come up with a uniform template, at least like minimum things that this policy framework need to have? There are two things that we also noticed that which are completely missing at the moment in all the policy frameworks that we noticed is of course one is the looking at the legal nature of this carbon credits, which is again gaining more traction nowadays. Some like defining on how actually the countries needs to look into that. Of course, Egypt is the one country actually which is which has actually something on this one, which they're defining the what's how they treat actually these carbon credits, and the other one is of course which is a very topic is that the infrastructure that they need to have. So these are the two things. And then, of course, most of the policy frameworks right now also exclusively focus on the Article 6 markets, not much on the voluntary markets. So one could argue that countries have nothing to do with the voluntary and hence they should not talk about this thing. But of course, there are exceptions. We saw countries like Ghana, Rwanda, and etc. also talking about what the voluntary markets, for example, needs to also provide some information to the governments and etc. So it's kind of a mix and match right now. So we are trying to bring some kind of harmonization and standardization in terms of how countries need to approach, while fully recognizing that the context and then the requirements might be different. So I just end up by saying that yes, they need to we need to balance between the domestic considerations and then also the efforts that we are making to harmonize at the international level. Maybe governments can start prioritizing some of the things like authorization process and then of course eligibility of the projects. Again, don't basically try to be a perfect from the beginning, so and then how do we actually move ahead basically by establishing some of the minimum things. And of course, I mean, there are already enough examples I think for us to learn from each other and then improve upon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hari. I think it was just one of the words in the last slide said, don't let perfection be the enemy of good. I think that's the theme I'm going to take because I don't think we will ever have a perfect working system. Could I get some help with the presentations? Just wanted to showcase one slide to you guys. I mean, one is the thing that I think there is a bit of whether countries need to be involved in voluntary markets, because I think we are reaching a world where there will be a massive intersection between voluntary market, compliance market, and contribution units. I mean, there's a whole landscape out there, and something that I think, and I really like the way you kind of mentioned all of this. I'm going to go to the first slide. This is all on VNV and the work that we do, but we see that just quickly for 5 minutes, we see that it's all over the place, really. I mean, sorry about that, but there is a play for different markets to actually look at different sectors within your NDC strategy. And sometimes when you're working with host country governments, the host country gets stuck up on one sector or the other to define the strategy. And that's a problem. Because if you are defining your entire carbon market framework plus to be, I mean, just on Red Plus, then you're ignoring all of the other sectors that can be used by other market mechanisms within the market. And voluntary carbon market could play that role. For example, energy efficiency can also be funded by carbon market. You can have different kinds of methane emissions, this, that, so you need to break down your NDC. And what we are trying to do is we are trying to put a climate finance layout around carbon markets on how SIX can interact with VCM. And then you have governments, philanthropies, and all of that who are coming in as blended finance instruments into the program. So when we go to a bilateral, I'm like, listen, don't start doing programs with the country, strengthen the institutional capacity of the country by providing technology platforms. Otherwise, this registry and this inventory that we are talking about, who has the money to host it? So we are saying everybody has a play in this. We do not need to be jostling for space. And for us, I think we're seeing a world where everybody seems to be like, this is the right way. I think we need everybody on this. Standards, philanthropy, public finance. Public finance systems can interact with carbon markets. It's a misnomer that ODAs cannot. Of course they can. So how can you make all of that work in your benefit to make a strategy that helps you meet your unconditional NDC, part of your conditional NDC, by using markets? I'm a big believer in the power of markets, not just to fund NDCs, but I'm a big believer for adaptation as well. And a lot of the countries that we come from or countries we operate in, this mitigation finance from markets is actually adaptation. When I was coming in today, I saw a lot of demonstration that said carbon finance is not climate finance. I completely disagree. It is the only form of result-based climate finance that works today. And it needs to be used extremely strategically. So for me, the whole discussion, and now I would invite our panel to come on the stage, if you could just take your place, is that you'll have different market mechanisms around 6 VCM, domestic ETS. A lot of governments do domestic ETS because they are peer pressured into it. I don't think that's the way the world should be going into. A domestic ETS exists for a reason, and for me, it will be for a high emitting, high income, or a high middle income country where you would need it. If you're not a high emitter and not within that bracket, domestic ETS is not for you. This is my personal opinion, but this is something I'm going to put out there because this, otherwise we will have too much of a fragmented market, transparency, and all of this will be an issue in the future. And then, of course, you will have different kinds of GCF, philanthropy, all of this interacting with you. So do not box climate finance into different areas. It's all interacts with each other. And if you really think out of a larger strategy and think multi-sector, think different NDC trajectories, and think different mitigation costs of those trajectories. And that's how you would define very good, robust climate finance, carbon markets mechanism. This is just our experience. I want to set some context. We've been working with governments over 15 years now on the project development side. We are not a policy maker, but we are not able to develop projects or do transactions. We have money ready to deploy, but we are not able to because of all of the things that goes on at the policy levels with so many different voices saying so many different things to the government. And that's what this panel is about, is to demystify. I know it's overused a little bit. I don't like using that word, but again, for lack of a better word, I would now finally like to invite my panel. Sorry, I went on and on, but this is an important thing. So please. You have your name cards there, so I think it's in that order. I know so. And with that, I think the stellar panel, a lot of you know each other, I know that, but some of you don't, which is why I'm going to go through a round of introduction. A lot of you here might know a lot of people here. I'm going to start by introducing the panel very short, and please feel free to elaborate on that introduction when you're making your first intervention. So we have Mr. Kamal. He's the Deputy Head of Carbon Secretariat, Ministry of Environment, Cambodian. He's been leading a lot of the work around Cambodia's work and also a lot of work around Article 6 in the ASEAN region. So he joins us. Second, we have Olga. She was the ex-supervisory board chair, and she's an active carbon market player. A lot of people know her, and I don't think she needs much introduction. She's been in the UNFCCC negotiation space for probably one of the longest time. I mean, at least one of the persons I know has been there for the longest time, and there maybe more, but somebody who speaks a lot of sense. So that's exactly why she's here. But we have Andrew Howard, again, Senior Director, Climate Policy and Strategy with VERA. VERA is a standard, as you know, and Andrew does a lot of work on policy and also follows negotiations and has been in this field for a very, very long time. Everybody's been here in their fields for a very, very long time. So let's just take that away. And we have Mary Grady, the lovely Mary Grady. She's the Executive Director with Art Trees. That's, yeah, I mean, you're lovely as well. So, I mean, and Art Trees is doing the Red program, and she also leads ACR, and I mean, I'm not sure what her position with Windrock is. I think somewhere right up there. Yeah? Okay. And then we have, last but not the least, and I'm not going to do justice to the pronunciation of your name, so please apologize from before. I'm going to call you Rachel. She's at the Carbon Market Office with Ivory Coast, and she joins us today to give us some perspective around. She's with the Ministry of Environment, Sustainable Development, and Ecological Transition, and the Carbon Market Office, which I think is super important discussion going to happen today. So I will start Actually, I'll start with the countries first, just to get their views on this. And I'll start with you at Cambodia, Mr. Kamal, in terms of how are your governments looking at it? Because we do, I know there's a lot of meetings and strategies and readiness programs and all the works that happens, but how is your government strategizing the use of carbon markets, whether it be voluntary compliance? How are you seeing it? And is there going to be a framework? How are you looking at it? Just for our information's sake to begin with.
Thank you very much. Yeah, good morning. Thank you very much for inviting Cambodia. I think this is a very important event, and thank you for this question. In short, I would like to answer that Cambodia start involving with emission reduction from tracking, doing by learning. In the past, before Paris Agreement, we joined PDM, Pre-Development Mechanism, and we have complete around 10 projects. And then after that, we volunteer to involve with VCM, voluntary about markets. We learn and we do this project with the development partner. At that time, we have a VCS, WCS, help us to develop project proposal for one important biodiversity area in Cambodia. So now we look why with the VCS, voluntary about market, we develop. We have 15 Red Plus projects with CF, with VCF. And just recently, the government in this 7 government mandate, according to the pentagonal strategy of the Cambodia, okay, we launching the agricultural operation manual. And this a new gateway to engage more sector, other for non-forest sector, namely like waste sector, IPPU, agriculture, and energy. So we expect that, and now we are working on dissemination of agricultural operation manual, and we establish a mechanism for coordinating, facilitating with the private sector for come and discuss about the project formulation. I will quit my answer at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a bit of a. I'll come back to you on the policy and when we are expecting that to be framework. I'll come back to you on this. I'll move again. Like I said, I'm going to start with the country. So, with you, Rachel, what are your strategy, or what is your strategy around this? I mean, I think you've been working on this for a while as well, what I hear. So,
okay, thank you so much for the invitation. I think our experience is not different from the one of Cambodia. We started with the CDM under the Kyoto Protocol, and it didn't work. So with the Paris Agreement, we wanted to take this opportunity to have more cooperation under this agreement. So we started the work on Article 6 just after the adoption of the Paris Agreement, and we go into that 2 years ago, because in our NDC, we already included that we would like to participate in the carbon market, in the international carbon market. So for that, it was important for us to put everything in place. We had a lot of requests for cooperation, bilateral cooperation, but we wanted to put into place our framework, carbon market framework, before starting cooperating with the different partners. So we started this process 2 years ago with the support of UNDP and also DGGI. And the first question we asked to ourselves was how to get there. We knew that we wanted to participate, but we didn't know the way to get there. So we had the partners, and at the national level, we designated our focal point. We also put in place a task force on Article 6 to conduct the process until the framework is ready. So at this point, we put in place our carbon market office. It was created by decree, presidential decree, just in August 1st. And at the regulatory framework, we have a manual of procedure that describes all the steps, all the responsibility during all the carbon market participation process. So we are at the stage and saying that it took us a bit longer. And we also developed our carbon registry. We have a national carbon registry. It was completed just before we come at COP. And we are here at COP. Our minister was there to tell everybody that we are ready now to cooperate since our framework is ready. I would like to stop there until I have other questions. Thank you.
So your framework is ready, and your framework will be ready, right? Okay, or is ready to be used? Not yet. Okay. It's a long journey, is it?
The operation may launch already.
Launch?
Yeah, 2 months ago.
So it's launched. So both of you. Okay. Perfect. That's a great way to move into next. So Andrew, now if it's launched, next is we need to do some projects there, no? So what do we need to get done over there? And maybe I'll come to Olga right after that as well, on the similar kind of line of questioning. But from your perspective, and you've been engaging with a lot of governments, and do touch upon whether governments also are, because we see a lot of governments also doing their own standard thing, which kind of worries me a little bit. So how are you, what's your stand on it, or what's your opinion on it? I'd just like to know your views on it as well.
Sure. Very good. So our framework is also ready, and has been ready for almost 2 decades now. And that also means that we've gathered a lot of experience, and there's a lot of refinement, which is okay. Is that going to be better? Yeah. Yeah. So we've had almost 2 decades now of refining, pouring more experience into it. And I think one of the things I would say is running a carbon program is a lot of work. It takes a lot to establish it. What is often underestimated is it takes an awful lot to maintain it and to make sure that it's that the methodologies are keeping up to scratch with new science, new technological practices, new market conditions. It really is an enormous amount of work to keep it going. And I think that's in answer to your question, Sandeep. We're also a little concerned, I think, when we speak to market players who are then faced with so many different purchasing programs. It is a lot of work for the project developers and for the investors. And I think what we see is project investors and developers, they like to work with what they're familiar with, and they know that programs like our Verified Carbon Standard, VCS, but also like a lot of other purchasing programs, they are well established and have very well honed procedures. So, I think what I would say is our framework has been ready for a long time. I'm not sure what's happening with the sound. Is this still okay?
That's okay.
Yeah. So, it's possible for countries to work together with our standards, to use independent purchasing programs in order to generate the credits. I think there's a lot of really growing interest in this area. A lot of countries, I think, are beginning to realize just how much work it is, as I say, not only to establish, but also to maintain the purchasing programs. So we're having a lot of countries who are now turning to us and saying, okay, I don't need to reinvent this wheel. I can use VCS, I can use the other purchasing programs. And I think that works. One of the things that we're doing is we're doing additional work to try and smooth the interface between ourselves and countries. So a lot of this work is with those countries, and it comes down to very pragmatic steps. So it's mapping out the procedures of what a country needs to do, what we need to do, and make sure that these different steps in the procedure are coordinated with each other, and that we're speaking the same language and we're using the same terms and definitions. So we're working on that at the moment. We're running a collaboration together with the government of Singapore and also Gold Standard in order to try and work out how countries can work together with independent encryption programs. And a lot of that comes down to communications between the programs and countries in both directions. So authorization is something which the country will communicate to us, but we then also need to communicate back to countries to say, well, we've just issued X number of credits to Y projects. We can tell them when transfers occur. We can tell them when the first transfers, the famous first transfer definitions on Article 6 have been met, in order that those countries then know how to populate their accounting reports up to the UNFCCC. So we're encapsulating all of this in something we call in the Article 6.2 crediting protocol. It's something which we'll develop further next year. We've kind of scoped it out currently, but early next year we'll continue in actual putting it into a draft document. There's a lot of countries who are interested in signing up to it, and I know there's also crediting programs as well that we're hoping to also join us. So we need to go through a whole consultation phase for that.
Thanks, Andrew. I got to know some, a few standards getting together. I think that's one theme that I quite like. I think, and also, and this is a note to governments, not on the panel, but anybody who may listen to this, is getting your own standard, domestic standard is not the smartest idea all the time. It might have a place in some countries, but then there is a whole lot of work that has happened over the last 2 decades to create standards and methodologies and registries. This reinventing the wheel is actually detrimental and leads to more delay in climate action, in my opinion. But leave it at that, Andrew, but thanks for that. I think a lot of good things said out there. Olga, over to you. When countries are strategizing their carbon markets, now, we see a lot of multi-stakeholder engagement. That's the buzzword, right? But then when you have too many multi-stakeholders, there's too many opinions out there. How does a country chart a path of their own? And what are the challenges you see in them being able to do this with their own strategy, and how, because operational Article 6 would need a lot of host country tweaks within interministerial work. It's not going to happen just because in the CDM days, it was just a letter of approval. Today, with Article 6, you have NDC sectors, so you have different ministries. So how do you see this panning out, in your opinion so far? And please feel free to comment on more within the Article 6 space.
It's a difficult question because there's a lot of questions in that question. Yeah, okay, I'm good now. Okay. Oh yeah, okay, now I'm good. I think it's of course complex for host parties, host countries, to navigate the multitude of standards in Article 6 space. And I'll try to explain it to quite a few. And I think there's obvious difficulty with, capacity, and donors are trying to build the capacity, but it's very hard. We've been working on this for 20 years. It's not necessarily the same in host country government. And another part is that, working for the government it's a special exercise, and I really have a lot of appreciation for the work that civil servants do, working for governments in developing countries. It's not so simple. It's different priorities, the different procedural tasks, and at the same time accumulating knowledge, participating internationally in the space in the same way as other experts are. Now, we don't see that many developing country negotiators, for example, in Article 6 room. And it's being negotiated primarily by somebody on their behalf. And it's very, very important I feel that, countries do get engaged, they get national experts engaged, and they're on equal with other international experts. And that is one of the first steps. And the second step is, of course, also determining, what is it that you want to do in your country, prioritization. And once you sort of become more familiar, you'll start understanding that there's some labels that are being attached. I think people like to play with the label of environmental integrity a lot. And I think it has lost its original meaning, honestly, because, environmental integrity is not determining the courage of the banana. Environmental integrity is about actually appreciating the fruit, and there are many different types of bananas. They don't stop being bananas. But it's important for you as an expert to know that we're still looking at the banana, not at the peach, right? And that takes expertise to understand. And that has to come from within the host country government, the host country experts. I think maybe if I were to touch on the third one, the domestic carbon standards and emission trading schemes, which I actually happen to know a lot about. Doing domestic emission trading scheme is extremely complicated. And it pays off if you have emission intensive economy with diversified sectors and a lot of entities. Because you cannot have proper emission trading scheme among 70 enterprises. Really doesn't work. We hear about, EU ETS. Well, EU ETS is 12,000 enterprises, I think, or maybe even 21. I don't remember. It's a 1 and 2 number. And they have trading on a daily and hourly basis because they're traders that are adjusting their positions. And all of the countries that I've seen that are trying to do the emission trading schemes, they would see like a trade once a year. Then, because they have enterprises that need to settle their position before the reporting period. There is no continuous trading. There is no continuous carbon market price, and it all becomes very odd. So if you have a limited number of entities, carbon tax is actually a better way to do it. And you can, now that Singapore is down, you can actually say, well, you can do, for your domestic purposes, and it depends on the size of the country, obviously. We want to encourage your contributions to our mitigation of the NTC, and then maybe a domestic carbon standard is okay, but then it's only if it's for domestic purposes, and you want to contribute to your own economy, you want your own corporate sector to contribute to your own economy, and then you want to be structured to something specific. Big corporates, please help us with waste management because our government somehow is not able to do it. So please go and we give you free hand, do something there. That's totally normal. It's very different if you try to export your carbon. And then, of course, yes, absolutely. There are standards, there are registries, and doing your own registry is highly not recommended. There are negotiations going on registries, and I don't know if you're following them, but in very, very simple ways. The big divide is whether registries are about holding tomatoes or holding information about tomatoes. And they're very irreconcilable views on that. Because it's kind of get complicated, what is that, if you're holding tomatoes, what's the quality of the tomatoes, and others are saying, well, it's just information about tomatoes, so quality is determined by those that are holding the tomatoes. And you have a whole range of things there. So I think it's important for the host countries to also kind of understand the dynamics of it, because it makes you more confident in whatever policy decisions you're making once you understand better. And that makes it possible for you to better serve your countries.
But thank you so much. I mean, the couple of things there. And I think just to add on to that a little bit longer, if you may, I mean, when we're looking at different market mechanisms working, the demand side of that mechanism, to understand that is very, very important before you come up with the mechanism. Like you said, if you have 70 trading companies, there is no demand as such. This is not a market anymore. And so is when we look at domestic ETS sectors. For example, if I have a SME energy efficiency credit today in the VCM, I cannot sell it. It's as simple as that. But maybe my domestic ETS, but I mean, as a country, I still need a lot of finance in decarbonizing my SMEs. So that is where maybe I take that as a strategy for my domestic ETS, while my little nature removal, which has an amazing amount of demand internationally, goes somewhere outside. So it's about demand creation to decarbonize. We have reduced the NDC and corresponding adjustment to a decision. Your NDC is going away from you. That's the wrong narrative. Carbon markets actually helps you meet your NDC, and that sometimes if you strategize properly, it does. So the whole idea needs to dramatically flip. I think the microphone, one of them is on or something of that sort. Oh yeah, sorry. And another message from Olga, which I really like, developing country negotiators have to turn up on Article 6 negotiations. They just have to. You cannot send a representative of your country who's not from your country and understand your country, because then the banana and the fruit thing starts happening. And we've seen this recently. Of course, there's a lot more representation, but about 2-3 years back, it was all international consultants representing countries on Article 6. I'm like, why are you here? I just don't get it. But that seems to be the theme of the COPs, you know. International consultants negotiating on behalf of countries. I mean, for me, that's a big no. But anyway, can go on and on about it. Mary, let's come to you on this whole concept of voluntary. And frankly speaking, I was in that space where I was like, governments have nothing to do with VCM, keep them away. If they had to solve this problem, they would have solved it long back. There is a problem to be solved by different segments of market players. But now I think over the last 1.5 years, I wouldn't say I've converted completely, but I'm thinking that maybe it will be a bit more complex space than just that. So your comments on that and your work specifically with Leaf Coalition and Arteries and all of that in terms of how that all tied in for you.
Sure, thanks. I guess one thing that I've been contemplating a lot is, oh, sorry, is that better? One thing that I've been contemplating is there really a voluntary carbon market? Is that really a thing, right? And I'm not sure that there is. I think that there is demand that comes from different places. The demand that comes from actual regulated markets. And there's demand that comes from unregulated markets, right? But is it really voluntary when a corporate takes climate action if they're reporting to their shareholders, if they're reporting to their consumers, right? So it's one of those things that I struggle a little bit with. And I think that the interaction also with these markets is that you have independent crediting standards like the ones that I manage. And we're issuing credits that can be used across these different markets, right? So issuing credits that can be used for Article 6, 6.2 ITMOs, that can be used for airlines for CORSIA compliance, that can be used for compliance with the California carbon market cap and trade, that can be used for compliance with the Singapore carbon tax, that can be used by corporations towards their net zero targets, right? And so this mix of things that's happening, and what we're seeing, as others have mentioned, in countries is what's the best way to hopefully not reinvent the wheel, right? And rely on the infrastructure that exists. And when I say infrastructure, it's both the crediting bodies themselves, the governance that we have in place, the standards and methodologies that are constantly evolving, the actual oversight of validation and verification bodies, and the infrastructure of the registries where we're issuing credits and those are being transferred and retired. All of that infrastructure has been put in place over decades. And it is a massive undertaking, not only to replicate it, but then to maintain it. And for example, in the California market, the government decided we're going to save hundreds of millions of dollars a year by just relying on organizations that have all of that in place already to implement our offset program, right? CORSIA took that model and said, that's a great idea. we'll do the same thing. Instead of us as a body having this, we're going to let 1,000 flowers bloom. As long as there are harmonized standards for integrity, let's do that, right? The reason it's really important not to reinvent the wheel is because of the urgency part of this, right? The urgency part of this is we've got this in place now and we can act now. So ideally, governments can do like Ivory Coast and Cambodia are doing and saying, what is our framework? What are we putting in place? And how are we going to use these different instruments together? They're all complementary. We can have a domestic carbon market that includes non-regulated buyers, that includes regulated buyers through a cap and trade, ETS, and tax. We can access international markets, and you can do all this with common infrastructure, right? And that will take care of the urgency part of it. So really, it is getting those frameworks in place. And with art, we have also already successfully worked with the government of Guyana, who authorized units for sale, have put in place all of the paperwork and reports that back up that authorization, including their letter for who authorizes, including for information on revocation in that letter, or non that's irrevocable, actually, in the case of Guyana. Their biennial transparency report, their interim report. They've actually submitted their annual report where they've reported the first corresponding adjustment. And then we had to work with them to make sure that everything was in place is actually what needed to be in place under the rules so that we could make those credits eligible for CORSIA. So yes, there are still things being worked out and there are things that aren't final, but if somebody has to move and show that we're going to learn by doing, and I think that we worked hard with Guyana on that.
Did anybody buy those credits? Are you aware of it?
They are currently part of an auction for IATA that's open right now.
Wow.
So there, it's an active process.
Amazing. Andrew, you want something to say on that?
First of all, I would echo what Mary's just been talking about. And when you were saying that, I was thinking, I really wish we would stop talking about the convergence of voluntary and compliance markets, because to my mind, they are already converged. You know, the credits that ACI generates, the credits that ECS generates, they can be used in compliance. They can be used in compliance markets for voluntary. But what I really wanted to say is, none of what we're talking about means that the government is excluded, because I think governments still have a very, very key role, even if they were wanting to use ACR and BCS and gold standard and all the others. Governments still have very much a role of looking at the NDC, looking at where they need support internationally with finance, what sectors or activities do they want to prioritize, how does it fit into their mitigation strategy, what sort of SDGs should be added in on top of carbon. And you know, we're already seeing countries that are looking at having in place some sort of approval process against their own criteria. And so what I really want to stress is governments can use independent critical programs while at the same time making sure that their own priorities are met. And you know, I often hear that it's very important for countries that these are sovereign decisions and they need the ability to make their own choices. All of that is possible. And so I think it's very much within the gambit of countries to think about how they want to use independent critical programs. They can take advantage of it, and I don't think that there are limiting options by doing so. And you know, we're seeing a lot of countries, as I said right at the beginning, who are starting to think along these lines.
Mr. Kamal, let me go to you now. With your work in Cambodia, and I specifically mentioned this because a lot of carbon market discussions around ASEAN revolves around forests. And for me, sometimes I'm thinking that this is a missed opportunity in a way. I mean, forests, I'm a really, really big believer in forest conservation as well as reforestation, restoration. But carbon markets, when it first came out, and when a lot of us came into the carbon markets, it was a lot more than just that. So what is your outlook? And typically, because you would also, I would assume, also have dialogue with other ASEAN countries. For the non-forestry sector, what is the kind of strategy you are thinking of using carbon markets? Just, I think the microphone, Andrew. Up.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mentioned in the first session that Cambodia involved with the CDM, Clean Development Mechanism, and first step. And we enjoy developing some non-forest sector projects like energy efficiency, renewable energy along the time, but it's not so much project, only around 10 or more than 10. But up to now, we see forest sector is dominate. I mean that most of the forest part of the country have been engaged with the Red Plus project. The question is why non-energy sector not well improved or increased a lot much? Because in Cambodia, starting from the Cambodia, it related to the scale because we see the visibility of the emission reduction, but the scale for investment is sometimes small, not big enough for attracting private sector doing so. So that the initial idea before we apply through POA project or activity, yeah, for the time. But now we again become back again with agricultural operation manual that to invite to engage private sector to develop emission reduction projects in non-energy sector. Again, I thinking about the scale. These are the key important point. Yeah, because the private sector it always look or explore the big scale, not the small scale, and we have a small scale. So particularly the country that doesn't have big or huge industry development. So what to do with this? So that I think in Article 6.2 not so attractive because the scale. Maybe we go to Article 6.8. Yeah, rather than 6.2. If we have big enough scale, big scale, so we have scale, we go to 6.2 or 6.4. Depend on the government decision. In this particular event, I also want to emphasize that if we want to achieve our emission reduction target for the global climate change, the first we see we have a lot of mechanisms under climate change umbrella designed by others, several mechanisms for us for all countries. But when we start doing project development, sometimes we look at very fashion, high fashion. We need good carbon price. We need top, but we don't look at the level, the low price. Why we don't understand well about the government position? Sometimes the government need low hanging fruit rather than high hanging fruit. So the project developer and the project participant should understand about the key position, the main what the government want the best. Before the government, the government mandate has limited mandate 4 years or 5 years. Some policy maker they want to make some result happen soon, not to wait for 5 years or 10 years after they mandate. So that while we develop emission reduction project, we should understand, we should consult with the policy maker what do they want. Yeah, then we can tailor, we can follow the decision, and then we can make the project happen. Starting from the low hanging fruit.
Thank you. I agree. And this is a challenge that we face quite a bit as in project development as well, because policymakers is the nature of civil servants. Is you have a lot of churning, and then you have the same educated process with a new person. So I think there's some merit in institutionalizing a lot of this rather than having people take a call. I think we've seen that with CDM; it became an institution. Which comes to my question to you, Rachel. I mean, you mentioned about. I am a big fan of Article 6 because I think it's going to be more democratic rather than CDM. CDM was concentrated on 4 countries, and it's not the fault of those 4 countries that they got their policy right. So I think if it's for me, I think to get this policy framework right is extremely essential to be able to participate in the market. But over to you, Rachel, and a similar question again is how are you looking at your non-forestry sector? I understand that forestry is one of the higher ones. But and not just from your country's experience, over West Africa, I know that you also do a lot of regional work around the area. So how do you see carbon markets interact with non-forestry sectors as well? I mean, from your perspective.
Thank you for your question. What I would like to say, I would like to come back to what you said about the NDC. Our NDC is not only about mitigation action, it includes also the adaptation actions. And in our framework, we deal with carbon mechanism, carbon market, not carbon market, also voluntary market, because we wanted to have in one an overview of what's going on in the country regarding the carbon market mechanism, also the non-market. So our registry is the translation of this framework. So through our registry, we can track and report on the non-market, the carbon market, and also the voluntary market. Coming back to your question about how we deal with non-forestry activities, in our NDC, we have 2 types of objective. We have the unconditional and the conditional. And in the conditional commitments, we have all the different sectors. And what we see is that all the partners, all the investors are interested in forestry sector. That's a fact. And we still have some space in the forestry sector because in our NDC, we intend to reforest around 2 million hectares of forest. So we have some space for cooperation. But our NDC covers all the different sectors. And as you said, I think we have a problem in waste management, and we will be happy to collaborate in other sectors. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's something I'm hearing from a lot of governments. So a lot of policies will be framed around forests, and that's my worry. Not that, I mean, I work a lot in forestry, and personally speaking, but then I think carbon markets can do so much more. Electric mobility is one that comes to mind. That I think when first I saw Article 6.2, I was like, this is an amazing use case for 6.2. Because it's a north-south technology transfer with a funding mechanism. And so that's why I'm a big fan of actually breaking down your targets and seeing which facility works for what. Because if we then start putting everything into one bucket, a 6.4 bucket or a VCM bucket, then I think we'll have a problem. But really nice to hear that from you, though. Mary, on to you now. And now let's take it back to forestry. From the perspective of, it is I think the single most important problem to solve right now. So let's go back to that. When we talk about jurisdictional approaches, like let's take, if you have a 1 minute elevator pitch on jurisdictional, what it means, because I just want to for context, because then I'm going to have a follow-up question to that, is how does this fit into when we talk about the integrity piece and the piece of robust accounting system? I know you've we've bilaterally spoken, but it'd be nice to have a little bit of flavor on that, on how that approach is actually much more robust in some way or the other.
Sure. Well, I think the beauty of the jurisdictional or sectoral crediting idea is to do what Mr. Kamal said, which is to get to scale, right? So you're going to have results at scale, and with the results at scale, it's going to attract investment at scale. The real theory of change behind the jurisdictional approach is simply that you have, you're guaranteeing the integrity because you're looking at results over a large scale, right? So for things like forestry, you're mitigating the risk of non-permanence because a small single event that could trigger a reversal at a project level is not triggering at a reversal necessarily when you're looking over a large landscape. It also helps to mitigate the risk of leakage because again, you're not just shifting an activity from one place to the next. You're looking at the accounting over the entire jurisdictional area. And in the case, we are implementing the tree standard through the Architecture for Art Plus Transactions, ART, right? And that is looking at also how to incorporate the crediting at the project level, right? So the projects that are under VERA can be nested under a jurisdictional framework so that you have both a top-down and a bottom-up activities, right? And those bottom-up activities, are contributing to the overall results. But I will also, the last bit I'll say is that it's because we're also developing the sectoral crediting framework for the Energy Transition Accelerator. And the idea really is in all of these, the fundamental theory of change is that governments are empowered to do what they do best, right? Which is they're creating the regulations in the case of forestry to address the drivers of deforestation, regulate land use, enforce illegal logging, etc., and addressing those so that they make those changes. In the case of the Energy Transition Accelerator, we're looking results across the entire electric power sector, the whole grid. And so governments are able to have a strategy. It's not just crediting for one project or another project. It's how are we going to decarbonize the whole sector? So we're going to have renewable energy, and we're going to take coal offline, and we're going to improve our dispatch priorities for cleaner technology, and we're going to build out the grid, right? So by empowering governments to have those strategies in place, you get those results at scale.
Perfect. At scale, results at scale. And carbon markets can give you finance at scale. This is established, done, dusted. I don't know why we still argue about it. On that note, Olga, final word to you, really, before we go for a Q&A. What do you see? How do you see the politics pan out, and what should we be looking out for in the future on Article 6 implementation? And your candid view on that, if I in terms of what should be the challenges from a geopolitics perspective, you think?
That's a really difficult question. I think in Article 6, what we will see, in my view, is that there's this fundamental issue right now is that there is lack of demand. There is lack of demand, and there are also trade issues that are coming in. And I feel that will be affecting Article 6. And it will affect it in the discussions that I've been discussing, I've mentioned already. We'll, instead of talking directly about the issues, we'll be talking about, the courage of the bananas, because that's how we can justify, right, the sort of issues being presented in Article 6 space. And there's a lot of argument, which is better and which is wrong, what is wrong. So that will be, I think, a big part of it. And another one is that I think will be, there's a fundamental, the North-South divide is, what is the meaning of carbon finance? Because there are those in Article 6 who think that we should just all do ambitious NTCs. And if we do ambitious NTCs, there's nothing to sell. So we shouldn't be selling, right? Because we all should be doing our ambitious NTCs. And that's another big sort of political divide that is coming into play in Article 6, and we will see it being played out more and more.
Okay, I mean, we have a lot of prompts out there. I really wanted to open up the floor to questions, but we sadly do not have time for that. So I'm going to have to close. But if you have any questions, the panelists are right here. It's about lunchtime, so you can follow them around all the way to the food court, but you will get your answers. But thank you so much for coming. This was a very important discussion about government action. I think this is something that we've been really looking to do at the COP. And not to get hijacked by one sector or the other when you're discussing carbon markets. There's a whole lot of them. There are a whole lot of greenhouse gases. Look at methane, look at this. You have a whole lot of things to play with here. So please use the markets. And that's the theme I would like to leave you guys with. Thank you so much for making the time here. Thanks.